It's really the first mission, I would say, that our church has gotten on a plane and flown somewhere. However, our church has a rich history of missions. And what I mean by that is our church has been doing missions ever since our existence. In fact, one of the first things we ever did as a church before we even built this was came into Delavan, and we started doing missions right here in Delavan. And what I mean by that is we started making relationships. We started talking to the businesses and to the community and started investing in Delavan. And when you talk about missions and you look about what happened in the Bible and what established missions throughout the world, it didn't start with just getting on a plane and going somewhere. And in fact, there's some people that don't even think that that's real missions. There's some people that think that the heart of missions is actually starting right where you're at and building relationships with people around you and bring them to a closer relationship in their walk with Christ. So where are we? What have we done? I want to invite somebody to come up this morning. John Mayer, can you come up here real quick? John and I go way back. John and I have known each other for a long time, and we're kind of soulmates in the sense that we're both adventure lovers. And so a number of years ago, John and I went up to Alaska on a missions trip, and we did all kinds of different things up to Alaska. Went to a bush we went several different places, but we got to know each other, and we got to realize that not only are we kind of soulmates in adventure, but we're kind of soulmates in that we both have a heart for missions and reaching out to people. So here at the river, we started one step at a time, and what it meant is that we started making relationships. John, what are some of the things that we've done over the past years to start doing this?
Okay, we first started this acts of kindness. The idea of doing random acts of kindness is just doing something simple and giving without expecting anything back in return. So some of those included, we started out feeding parking meters in Lake Geneva. We gave Coke and coffee.
We kind of got in trouble for that one, though, huh?
We do these things fast. We gave out popsicles. We'd go into retirement homes and carol and visit and set up bird feeders, visit with some of the residents. Various art-related projects we've done at this church. Ice fishing, feeding the ice fishermen out on the ice and coinciding with the Winter Festival. We've done that several
years. And we've been talking about doing that again this year, so if you're interested in that, come and tell John that you're interested. Maybe we'll make it happen again this year.
Yeah, and that's weather dependent, of course, but It's been getting cold, so they might be out there. We've done leaf raking, flower planting at Trailer Park. Brian Krakowski led a big canoe trip. And these events that we do, too, are somewhat like missions because we invite somebody else from outside the church to come on them. So that canoe trip was huge, and there were a lot of people that were not from this church that went on this canoe trip. So things like that. We have a friend from Southern Lakes who can get us a $16 deal on skiing. And this is something we can do immediately on next Saturday night at Alpine. So anybody that likes to ski or snowboard, come and do that with us and bring a neighbor or a friend that might be unchurched at this particular point in their life. And by doing this, we do life together and we include them in what we like to do. Dale mentioned we all have passions. I'm, like Ryan, cut out of the outdoor adventure kind of thing, but every one of you guys has a passion and a gift and a talent. And we have an other category for these outreaches. If you see a need in the town or around you, you can lead your own, and all it takes is you and one other person to get out there and do something loving to show God's love in a practical way to the community. And I can help you get started with that or oversee it. I'll have a little booth up there. If you're interested in going on a trip on next Saturday, it'll be every Saturday night, 5 to 5:30 at Alpine. We can go skiing together and have a blast doing that. So,
thank you, John. So what we're talking about this morning is we're talking about a blueprint for your life. But I want to be careful because what we're not going to do is we're not going to pray a miraculous prayer this morning, and God probably won't reveal the next 50 years of your life to you right now. So I'm just setting that up for you right now. That's not going to happen, most likely. It'd be great if it did. But what I want you to do is to get into the mindset of setting up the prerequisites for thinking about what you are doing yourself and what you can do to start living this life mission-oriented. Now, I know that not everybody here is wired for evangelism, and I'm going to get to that. However, we are all wired in one way or another for relationships. Do you agree with that? Everybody has some kind of a relationship, some better than other people, but we're all relationship people. We all have somebody in our life that we've had a close bond with. And so what I'm encouraging you to do this morning is to take one step at a time and to start right now by seeking those around you. Isn't it interesting that Jesus, although he had disciples that he mentored, and they were already very solid in their walk and their faith, he didn't stop there and said, okay, this is my role. I'm just going to mentor disciples. He didn't just do that. What else did he do? He took himself all the way back down maybe to a more basic form, and he made relationships with people that were outside of his normal circle. You see this time and time again, that he was making relationships with people that maybe he didn't know or that he didn't have an interaction with on a daily basis. He was creating those relationships. And sometimes it would be easy, like for me to say, oh, I'm the pastor of a church. All as I'm going to do is mentor a few other, leaders and elders in the church, and then they'll talk to the other smaller people. But that's not the way that Christ gave us an example to do it. He gave us an example that each one of us should start building those relationships around us and building into other people. Maybe it starts by going on a ski trip with them. Maybe it starts by having them over to your backyard for a barbecue. Maybe it's several months until, they find out that you believe in Jesus and you ask them to come to church. Who knows what the process is? It could take several years. In Jesus' life, he worked on many people probably for a longer course of time than the first time that he ever met them. So we want to look at wiring it differently, and in order to do that, we want to read some scripture. Some of the best advice I ever got during high school was when I took a job working at Pizza Hut right down the street. I lived on Highway 50, about 3 blocks away from us. There's a Pizza Hut another 3 blocks down the road, and when I was 14 years old, I got a work permit, and I walked down to Pizza Hut because I could ride my bike to work, and I said, I want to get a job here. I wasn't so excited about working at Pizza Hut. I wanted to work for Oakley or Solomon or, something really cool like that, but Pizza Hut happened to be close, so I had to settle for Pizza Hut. So I walked down the street, and I got a job there, and after the first week, I remember my dad saying, so how's work going? How do you like it? And I didn't like it. I was in a hot, sweaty room all summer making pizzas, and I didn't like it. And he said, well, Ryan, it's just part of your life, and the challenge is that when you're in a situation like that, to continue working hard because you want to give honor to God. So do it as if you were called to do it for the rest of your life. And I kind of got depressed and said, man, I don't want to make pizzas for the rest of my life. But it changed my mindset of how I made pizzas because I started doing it as if it was my ministry, as if it was what I was being called to do for the rest of my life. And I started making relationships. And 2 weeks later, I was 14, 2 weeks later, I brought this 21-year-old guy over to our house for dinner. And my parents were pretty conservative, those of you who know them. And this guy that I brought over was pretty much what we would all consider a burnout. I mean, he had long 80s rocker hair and just was kind of little rough around the edges. He said words at work that I had never heard before, and I brought him over to my house, and about 6 sentences into our dinner conversation, I think he ripped the F-bomb at the dinner table, and my mom was kind of looking at me like, "This is who you're hanging out with right now?" I got to be incredibly good friends with this guy over the course of I only worked at Pizza Hut for about a year, but over the next year I got to be really good friends with this guy, and it was a long time before I invited him to church. In fact, it was almost to the end of my working relationship with him, but I brought him to church, and the guy came to church, and he ended up, the farthest guy I could think of from being a church person, and now the guy, many years later, gosh, this is, I don't even want to say, 20 years ago almost, now the guy's a youth pastor at a church up in northern Wisconsin. And it's just crazy how God does stuff like that. It wasn't me. It wasn't that he liked my family when I brought him over for dinner that night, but God had a work to do, and he chose to use me at 14 years old working at Pizza Hut to do his job. I think he does that a lot. God has a job for you today. John Maxwell is one of my favorite authors. He's a leadership guy, and he says some things that are pretty amazing. I want to read something that he wrote in his book. It's a little hard to follow, but hang in there with me. John Maxwell says this. He's speaking about the subject of success. He says, "What's wrong with being average?" Maxwell says, "If you're not a Christian, there's nothing wrong to being average. If you are a Christian, then you must not be content until you develop to the fullest extent of the potential God has given you." That's really interesting. You mustn't be content until you develop to the fullest extent God has given you. What this is saying is that we are a process. We're a one step at a time process. And that we need to recognize that blueprint for our life and keep working and not get off course on that. That we need to stay the course. We need to, keep in check. And what we're talking about today is building relationships, going towards mission. So we need to keep in check of saying, what are we doing today to win others for Christ? What are we doing today to build great relationships with those in our community? The hard one, what are we doing today to build relationships that say that we live with the love of Jesus Christ? Let's start reading. I want to go right to the verses. Before I start reading the verses, I want you to think about what it means to have an influence on somebody else. When I started working that job, what made the job worthwhile was that I started investing in the relationships at that job. And many people have asked me today, what does it mean to be a follower of Christ? What does that really mean? And you really need to think hard about that question. I'll ask you guys right now, what does it mean to be a follower of Christ? What does that entail? And what I believe it means is living a life by the example of Christ. And how did Christ live? He lived making deep relationships with others while having a deep relationship with God through reading the Scriptures and in his prayer life and communing daily and even by the hour with God the Father. But it also means investing in people around you. I want you to think about, when was the last time that you had a significant impact on somebody else? I mean a significant impact in somebody's life. When was the last time? And it's easy to say, well, my kids, my spouse. But when was the last time that you made a relationship, a brand new, fresh relationship, and you made that relationship and you impacted somebody's life? You blessed them. You wrote into them. And I'm not necessarily talking about lecturing them to the Bible or, bringing them to church even, or about something like that. I'm talking about living and showing them the love of Christ. Build a tree for people to reap for generations to come. I wrote that in the back of my Bible about 10 years ago. Build a tree for people to reap for generations to come. And I've lived by that statement. That my goal is to build in people around me new relationships, not just once, but to keep these strong relationships going for a long time. And most of you guys know I've been a youth worker my entire life. So from the time where I was about 14 years old going down the street to work at Pizza Hut, I also led Awanas on Wednesday night. And then later I started doing youth group. And I've got kids in my youth group that some of them I successfully mentored. Sometimes were not as successfully mentored. But some of those that I would say weren't successfully mentored, their lives are kind of chaos right now. I get phone calls. And I say, hey, Ryan, listen, I know I haven't, totally been in that God thing like you wanted me to do, but I want you to pray for me because I'm dealing with this. And I want you to pray for me because I'm dealing with that. And believe it or not, there's people that I started building into 20 years ago that I almost just kind of wrote off, that 20 years later they came back and they started sitting down listening to what God wanted to do in their life. It's not a fast, easy relationship in most cases. It's a long one. It takes time to invest. Family is sometimes the hardest one, but you have to stay the course. You have to keep going. You have to pray for them. You have to bless them the way that Jesus would bless and love them. Let's get into the Word. Let's go to the first set of Scriptures. This is Matthew 10, 1 and 2, it says, Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. These are the names of the 12 apostles. First Simon, who's called Peter, his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. We'll keep going. Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon the zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. These 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions: do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel. We're going to talk about that in a second. Let's keep reading. As you go, proclaim this message. The kingdom of heaven has come near. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those you who have leprosy, drive out demons. Freely you have received, freely give. I love that line. Freely you have received, freely give. Do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts, no bag for the journey, or extra shirt or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave. I like that one too. As you enter the home, give it to your greeting. If the home is deserving, let your peace rest on it. If it is not, let your peace return to you. If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust on your feet. Now, if we take these words into account, how different would your life be right now? If that was your blueprint for life, you say, Matthew 10, this is what life is all about. If I go work at a regular job, it's going to be to fulfill Matthew 10. If I decide to go to college, if I do this, if I do that, it's all about Matthew 10, about staying the course, about building relationships, about building into other people for the gospel and the glory of God. How different would your life be right now? Has anybody done any of those things that we just read? It's interesting. So how do we get there? It's one small step at a time. I don't think that any of us are going to leave here and we're going to go get in our cars, not bring any gold or silver, which means money or credit cards, and just start driving and find somebody that we have, start talking with in the mall or something like that and say, I'm going to come live in your house and I'm going to, get a great relationship with you. Well, do you have any money for rent? Well, no, but I'm going to come stay with you. It's a little out there, but we're going to bring that into our context for where we're at. So carefully. Follow me here. The first thing I want you to do in Matthew 1, he says, he called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out evil spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. What does this say to me? It says that Jesus built into those disciples, that there was training, that he called them, that he gave them authority. So the first thing that I want you to recognize here is that it begins by getting training, by being empowered by God, by being into it. Do you guys remember last week when Dale was preaching? How many years was Paul in training in one chapter of his life? You guys remember the answer? 13 years. So this verse 1 that we're reading right here, he called his 12 disciples to him, that was 3 years of their life. This one verse is 3 years. That's a little better than 13 years, but my point is, in Paul's life and in the disciples' life, it took time. It was an investment. It didn't just happen overnight. That one first step of being empowered, being called, being trained in the authority given by the Bible takes time. So that's our first step, is to get into the Bible. Now, our church has a lot of different ways to do that. We have small groups. We have groups that meet that are doing life together groups, and we sit down and we talk through it. Our youth group is starting up for junior high again pretty soon. On February 5th, we have a meeting. If you've ever wanted to teach or talk to middle school kids, please come to that meeting after church on the 5th, and we'll get you plugged in someplace. Kids church upstairs, we're always in need of teachers up there. There's so many places to teach and to receive teaching here at the river. Get plugged in. Go talk to the booth as you walk in and you see the little info center back there today and say, how can I get more plugged in? And they will get you plugged into something today. The next thing is to determine who God is calling you to reach. Verses 5 and 6 say, these 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Rather, go to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, this is interesting. Why does he just tell his disciples to go to the lost sheep of Israel? He's not saying go to all the world. Now, he does say that. That's later than this. He eventually gets there, but in the first prerequisites, when they're still in training, he says, first go to Israel. Now what this means is go to those that you already know, that you already have relationships with, and start building into them first. Start by taking that little step of going to those that are already in your community. Now later, once that you have it established in your community of friends and family and things like that, that's when he says, now, the Great Commission, go ye to all the world, making disciples, preaching and prophesying in my name. But the first part of that is just a little step right here, in your backyard. In Delavan, Wisconsin. This is what this says. The 12 Jesus sent out with the following instructions. So he's saying, River of Life Christian Church, here are your instructions. Don't go out to the rest of the world yet until we win Delavan over for Christ. Amen? Now, we're working on that. Some of us are on different levels in that. We're in Hawaii right now. That's awesome. We're starting. We're just barely. You know how many years this church has been around? Many years. More than 5. So, for that many years, we've been building internally. We've been going out to Israel, as the Bible said. And just now, it took all those years of building, just now until we all of a sudden can go to start going to the rest of the world, which in our case is Hawaii. Next, number 3. Articulate the heart of your message. This is so important, because you know what my least favorite part about Christianity is? In fact, I even sometimes stutter when I say Christianity, because it's almost been given a bad connotation. You guys know what I'm saying? Why has it been given that reputation? Why do I almost stutter when I say Christianity? Because when you say that, so many people know of the bad parts of Christianity, which typically happens under something called outreach and evangelism. It's people that have not taken the time to think about how did Christ articulate his words. What is the message that we need to send first to Delavan and then to the rest of the world? And they may come off as too harsh or too abrasive, or they may not have really thought about what they're doing, and it's almost given Christians a bad name. So I want you to really pray and seek what your message is. And I hope that it's a message of love, a message of hope, a message of blessings, that you can come alongside somebody, and maybe it's just starting on going skiing with them, or taking them to a football game, or whatever it might be, but building that relationship and showing that you are intensely devoted to a relationship with them and you care about them as a person. Because too often we try to perhaps shove the gospel down their throat without establishing that we love them first. Does that make sense? What is the heart of your message? Jesus said in verse 7, as you go, preach the message. I love the RSV translation. Instead of message, it says the good news. Preach the good news. The kingdom of heaven is near. Now, when it says preach the good news, it doesn't necessarily preach. We've taken that word preach and we've made that synonymous with kind of like telling people the way it's going to be. This is the way it's going to be. Do this. And that's not necessarily what this message meant. When he says preach the good news, the word preach in this context has been massively miscommunicated in our era. What this meant is to go immerse yourself with them, to become with them, to spend time with them. And later he gets even more into that when he says, go live with them, go spend time with them. So what is the heart of his message is he wants to love you. He wants to change you. He wants to give you recovery from the bad decisions that you've made in life, from the things that have come to haunt you. He wants to give you hope towards a new life and where you can be, and he wants to have a deep, intimate, loving relationship with you. It's a message of love, blessings, and hopes, and it starts by living that. Number 4, build your mission around helping people. This is really important. Verse 8 says, heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse those who have leprosy, and drive out demons. So when he is giving the charge to go out and to win people for Christ, what does it come to? It's based around helping people. Now, we don't help people because we're building up like rewards. We don't want the Jesus pat on the back. That's not what this is all about. We're building into people and helping people because this is what God commanded and how he says that we deeply work with him. How many of you guys have been in a relationship with somebody for a long time and you haven't really gotten to know them, and then all of a sudden one small instance happens and you really get to know them? I mean, something goes through, maybe it's tragedy, maybe it's a retreat trip, maybe you spend the weekend with them, or you're in a situation where it causes you to be close to them for a long time, and you really get to know them. Sometimes in youth ministry, people downplay events. They say, why do you always have to do so many events in youth ministry? It should be more about Bible teaching and things like that. Well, that's true, but sometimes it's in the events that you establish the great relationships with people. And without those relationships, you can't do the second part, which is to start teaching and start mentoring about the way life really should be lived for Jesus. So it comes back again to relationships. And as you build these actions, build your missions around helping people, it starts to be real and genuine. And when you start to say, hey, what are you doing? Are you putting in a air conditioner this week? Let me come over and just help you with it. And all of a sudden, when you start doing things like that, you get to really know the people that you're with. And it's a great act of kindness, as John Mayer talked about, but oftentimes it's exactly what you need to show somebody, to show a lot of people that you're more about getting to know them and investing in them than it is about anything else. And that's the love of Christ. The next thing we need to do is double check our motives. Verses 8 through 10 say this: freely you have received, now freely give. Do not take along any gold or silver or copper in your belts. Take no bag for the journey, or extra tunic or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Jesus is saying two things to disciples here. He's saying, number one, forget about anything selfish. And number two, forget about your personal security. Number 5, I think, is the hardest step for us. That's the one where we get hung up on, because we all are too immersed with ourselves. Blame it on culture, blame it on society, blame it on all the material things that we own. I don't care what you blame it on, but this is the one we all struggle with. Life is about us, unfortunately. We go through day in, day out. We get up in the morning, and what do we think? What am I going to do today? I. What about me? And the heart of Jesus doesn't says, what are you going to do today? The heart of Jesus says, what are you going to do to help and impact others for the kingdom of God today? And it would be interesting to take one day out of your life and just say, this is what I'm going to do. You know why I like missions like our team did in Hawaii so much? You know why that's just a part of my life? Some of you guys don't know this about me, but most of my life I've been going on trips like this. In fact, from the time I was about 15 years old to about 4 or 5 years ago when my wife and I started having kids, I would go on 2 or 3 missions trips like that a year. I've been on like 30 of those. I've been to more than 20 countries on missions trips. However, the reason that I like missions trips isn't necessarily because of what happens, my impact on others in different countries. In fact, I downplay that. I have a hard time with going someplace on a missions trip because it's really hard to establish a great relationship with somebody on a missions trip like that. You can do it short term, but I like the long term ones. So I struggle with that a little bit. But what I really like about it is, guess what happens when I pick up and I go on a missions trip for a week? I eat, sleep, and drink the love of Jesus Christ. For some reason, I get up and in the morning, and this isn't just me, this is almost everybody that goes on a missions trip. They get up, they pray together, they strategize about what they're going to do to proclaim the love of Christ, and then they live a whole day, and then the next day, and the day after that, and pretty soon it's a whole week rotated around giving their life completely to Jesus Christ. And you know my favorite part about missions is when you get done with a trip like that and you get back the following Monday morning and all of a sudden you go, why should this day be any different? And that changes your life forever. That's why we all need to go to Hawaii next year. New Orleans this summer. I plan on going. Where's Maggie? Maggie, you're going, right? Right, Dad? She's going? Everybody saw him shake his head yes, right? All right. Double check your motives. Well, there's 2 more things I want to touch on briefly. I call this number 6, surround yourself and be loyal to worthy people. Verse 11 says, whatever town or village you enter, search for someone worthy person there and stay at his house until you leave. Now, this is interesting because this doesn't necessarily mean the person that you're ministering to, the people that you're ministering to. This is talking about people that are already in place in those areas. So this is talking about if I'm going to Hawaii, I'm going to find somebody who's already started ministering in Hawaii. We'll call it Surf the Nations just because. And I'm going to hang out with these people, and I'm going to let them introduce me to people and culture where they've already started building this relationship. And I'm going to associate myself with them and invest in them and bless them as I bless others. So, right here, where we are today, what does that mean? It means we need to surround ourselves with people that are also of the mindset of why should my life change? Every day needs to be just like it was when I was on this missions trip. And then, as you surround yourself with worthy people, they encourage you. They're of the same mindset. They're working towards the same thing that you are, and you're communing with them. You're praying with them. You're building each other up. The last thing, and I hate to end on this note, but it is the last thing, is be ready for rejection. Anybody ever been rejected in this room before? You don't have to raise your hands. Please don't. Be ready for rejection. It's part of it. Does Jesus proclaim that as he goes through the good work that life is going to be easy and that it's always going to be happy, and that once we're in a great relationship with Christ that we will never have anything to worry about anymore? No, I would even venture to say it's exactly the opposite of that. In fact, I would say if you are praying more and reading your Bible and freely investing in those people around you, that life is going to get real tough. And that you should welcome that. I know that's a hard thing to welcome, but you're going to face rejection. You're going to face hardship. You know what? Your checkbook might have a hard time surviving. Because if you're freely giving, do you think that includes freely giving out of your checkbook? Do you think that's part of the agreement that you're making? Absolutely. I would even venture to say that, that Jesus was never financially comfortable. Does that make sense? What does he say right here? He says, don't take any money with you. Just go. Money's only going to cloud our strategy for what we're accomplishing here. Now, I know those are hard words because we're all going, man, I need that checkbook. I need that 401k. I need all this stuff to survive. I have to send my kids to college. I have to do this. And we are called to be financially responsible. So don't get me wrong. But at the same time, we are called, number one, to give freely of what we have been freely given. Would you bow your heads with me and just consider something for a second?